Imagine living in the birthplace of democracy, yet your life belongs to someone else. Nestled between jagged mountains and sparkling blue seas lies the legendary world of ancient Greece, the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, theater, and some of the most enduring stories in Western history. But behind the marble columns and the glory of Athens and Sparta lay a much darker truth. This cradle of civilization was built on the backs of slaves. Their lives were often defined by hard labor, fear, and the constant threat of abuse. And for female slaves, the story was even more harrowing. In a society that already limited women's freedom, enslaved women lived under layers of vulnerability, exploited for labor, companionship, and often sexual use. This is the untold story of slavery in ancient Greece and the women who bore its heaviest burdens. The invisible foundations of Greece. Ancient Greece was not one unified nation, but a patchwork of city-states. Among them, Athens and Sparta were the most famous. Athens for its democracy and intellectual achievements, Sparta for its martial culture and brutal efficiency. Yet both relied heavily on slave labor to function. In Athens, slaves mined silver in dangerous pits, farmed the land, maintained households, and taught children as tutors. In Sparta, a subjugated population called helots worked the fields and endured lives of constant fear and humiliation, kept in check by systematic violence. The contradiction was staggering. Athens celebrated freedom and citizenship as cornerstones of its identity, but women, foreigners, and slaves had no political voice at all. For female slaves, there was not only political invisibility, but the ever-present danger of personal exploitation. To the lives of female slaves. The life of a female slave in ancient Greece varied depending where she worked, but almost all forms of servitude carried severe limitations and risks. Domestic servitude. Many female slaves served in Athenian households. Their duties ranged from cooking and cleaning to weaving and childcare. Some were nursemaids, tending to infants and young children day and night. These roles may have seemed less grueling than life in the mines or fields, but they came with their own dangers, constant surveillance, no privacy, and the ever-present possibility of abuse from their masters or mistresses. A domestic female slave could be punished for the smallest mistake, from breaking a dish to speaking out of turn. She was expected to be obedient, invisible, and available at all times. Market and workshop labor. Some enslaved women worked in markets, taverns, or workshops. They prepared food, sold goods, or assisted in the production of textiles and pottery. In busy public spaces, female slaves were exposed to harassment and exploitation, often treated as commodities in more ways than one. Sexual slavery. Perhaps the darkest aspect of female enslavement was sexual exploitation. Enslaved women, especially the young and physically attractive, were often taken as concubines or forced into prostitution. Wealthy men might keep them in the household as part of their private pleasures, while poorer owners sometimes rented them out in brothels or taverns for income. Sexual slavery was not an exception. It was an embedded feature of the system. These women were not only denied control over their labor and bodies, but their very identities were reduced to property. The duality of valued female slaves. Ironically, some female slaves could live lives of relative comfort, especially those who served as courtesans, musicians, or attendants to influential households. A skilled musician, a beautiful companion, or a well-trained household manager could enjoy better clothing, regular meals, and protection from the harshest physical labor. But this value came with its own chains. A favored female slave was still property, subject to sale, abuse, and punishment without recourse. Her status was only as secure as her owner's whims, and any hint of rebellion or disobedience could destroy her fragile position. Punishments and control. Greek slave owners maintained dominance through a mix of fear and social isolation. Punishments for slaves, male or female, ranged from whipping to branding, public humiliation, and in extreme cases, death. The Greeks did not usually crucify slaves like the Romans, but they practiced bloodless crucifixion. This involved binding a person to a wooden frame by wrists, ankles, and sometimes with a tightening neck collar. Victims could die from exposure, thirst, or slow strangulation. For female slaves, punishment carried an additional weight. It often doubled as public shaming. A woman's reputation, even as a slave, could affect how she was treated or sold. A visibly punished or branded woman became a walking reminder of her owner's authority and her lack of humanity. Female slaves in war and captivity. Warfare fueled the Greek slave system. When one city-state defeated another, men were often killed and women and children were taken as slaves. Female captives faced immediate displacement, loss of family, and a lifetime of servitude in a foreign city. Some were sent to row the ships or toil in fields, but many became trophies of conquest in domestic and sexual service. This cycle of capture and exploitation repeated itself throughout Greek history, feeding the markets of Athens, Corinth, and other city-states. The shadow of fear and resistance. Even in their oppression, slaves, male and female, posed a potential threat. Slave populations sometimes approached 30 to 40% of Athens. Their owners lived with the quiet, constant fear of rebellion. Women were less likely to organize violent uprisings, but they resisted in subtler ways, slowing work, feigning illness, passing information, or attempting escape. Some were able to integrate into society if freed, though manumission was rare and conditional. Even a freed woman often carried a social stigma, living on the edge of two worlds, never fully accepted, always marked by her past. The paradox of Greek civilization. Ancient Greece gave humanity the ideas of liberty, civic participation, and the value of reason. Yet the very society that celebrated freedom for its male citizens relied on the bondage of women and men who had none. For female slaves, life in ancient Greece was a constant negotiation between survival and subjugation. Some lived in relative comfort, others endured relentless physical and sexual abuse. All lived under the shadow of ownership, a reality that stands in sharp contrast to the ideals of democracy and enlightenment that Greece is remembered for today. The story of these women is a reminder that behind every great monument, every shining era of culture, there are those whose suffering made it possible. They were the hands that wove, the bodies that labored, and the lives that were quietly consumed by history. Ancient Greece dazzles us with its legacy of art, philosophy, and politics. Yet beneath that brilliance lay a system of human exploitation that denied freedom to thousands, especially women. Female slaves bore the heaviest weight, working unseen in kitchens and workshops, chained in warships, or forced into lives of sexual servitude. Their stories rarely appear in the heroic narratives of Greek history, but they are the unspoken foundation of its glory. In remembering them, we see the full picture of a civilization that gave the world the idea of freedom, while denying it to so many within its own walls.